Darkness still holds the room. The woman wakes without any signal beyond habit. She does not speak. She does not sit up at once. For a short time she remains where she is, lying on a low sleeping place near the wall. The wall covering is thin and heavy at the same time. It rests over her legs and hips. The air is cold enough that her breath feels sharp at the back of her throat. The room smells of stone and old smoke, not the bright smell of a fresh fire. A dull smell settled into plaster and wood. There is also the faintest smell of flour on cloth, ground into it over many days. Her hand moves out from under the covering. Her fingers touch the wall. The wall is rough. It is cold and slightly damp where the night has rested on it. She draws her hand back. She shifts her legs. Her bare feet find the floor. The stone floor takes warmth from her skin at once. She stands slowly. She stays standing, letting the cold move up through her ankles. She waits until the heaviness of sleep leaves her shoulders. A garment lies folded nearby. She picks it up. The fabric is coarse. It smells of smoke and old grain. She pulls it over her head and settles it down. She ties it with a strip of cloth at her waist. The knot is familiar. She ties it the same way every morning. In the dark, she moves with care. Her hands know where the latch is. She opens the door. The hinge gives a small sound. Then silence returns. Outside, the air is colder. It has the smell of winter in the city, damp stone, soot, and the stale ash of other hearths that burned long ago and have gone out. There is no bright scent of greenery, only cold air and the faint trace of smoke drifting between buildings. She steps into the narrow way and closes the door behind her. The sound of the door is soft, swallowed by the dark. Her steps are slow. Stone underfoot is uneven. Some stones are polished by feet, some are rough. Her foot finds the slope and the shallow edges without looking. The street is not empty, but it is quiet. A distant cough, a faint scrape of sandals somewhere beyond the next turn. A dog shifting in a doorway, then settling again. She walks toward the bakery. The bakery is a small space set into the line of buildings. The door is thick wood, worn smooth where hands push it open day after day. She puts her palm to it and leans. It yields with a low sound. Inside is darker than outside at first. The air smells of yesterday's work, flour dust, old yeast, cooled ash, and the faint sourness of dough that has rested. There is also the smell of stone that holds dampness through winter. She closes the door behind her. The outside sounds become faint. The room becomes still. She stands for a moment until her eyes adjust. Shapes appear gradually. The long work table, the bench, the oven mouth like a black opening in the wall, sacks against the far side, a water jar near the corner. She crosses the room and crouches near the oven. Her knees bend with practice. She reaches into the oven mouth and touches the ashes left from the day before. The ash is cold. It crumbles, fine and soft. It leaves a grey mark on her fingertip. She gathers the ash into a shallow pan. The pan scrapes lightly on stone. She moves slowly so the ash does not rise in a cloud. Even so, some dust lifts and settles. It lands on her garment. It lands on the floor. She sets the pan aside. She reaches for small pieces of kindling stacked near the oven. The wood is dry. It feels rough. Some pieces have splinters. She turns them in her hands and chooses the thinner ones first. She places them inside the oven mouth. She arranges them in a loose bundle, leaving space for air. She adds a thicker piece beneath, like a small support. There is no hurry. She adjusts a stick, then another. She pauses to feel the arrangement with her fingertips. She takes flint and iron from a pouch. Her hands are steady. She strikes once. A spark flashes and vanishes. She strikes again. A spark lands and dies. The wood stays dark. She strikes again. The sound is small but sharp in the quiet room. A spark catches on a bit of dry fibre. A thin flame appears, the size of a fingernail. It trembles. She leans closer and shields it with her hand. Her palm feels the first faint warmth. She does not blow hard, only a steady breath close to the flame. The flame grows. It takes the edge of the wood. It begins to feed. Smoke rises in a thin line. It smells raw at first, like fresh split wood and dust. Then it deepens. She adds one more thin stick. It catches. A low crackle begins, quiet and regular. She sits back on her heels. She watches the fire take hold. She waits. The oven will not warm quickly. It must be fed and left alone. She allows time for the heat to build in the stone. When the flame is steady, she stands. She moves to the work table. Her hand brushes the surface. The table is worn smooth in the center, where dough is pressed day after day. Near the edges, it is rougher, with small cuts and dents. A thin dusting of flour remains from the last cleaning. She takes a cloth. The cloth is stiff with dried flour. She dampens it in a small bowl of water. The water is cold enough to sting her fingers. She wipes the table. The cloth drags. A thin line of dampness follows it. Flour gathers into pale smears, then disappears as she wipes again. She wipes once more, then once more. The motion repeats until her hand feels only wood, not grit. She sets the cloth aside. She goes to a sack of grain. The sack is heavy. She grips it and shifts it closer with a scraping sound on the floor. Grain inside slides with a soft, dry hiss. She unties the top. She reaches in. Her fingers sink into grain. It is cool and hard, each kernel distinct. It slips between her fingers. She draws out a double handful and pours it into a shallow basket. The grain makes a muted, rain-like sound. She repeats the motion, again, until she has enough by habit. She carries the grain to the millstone. A hand mill sits on a low stand. Two stones, one above the other, worn and darkened by use. A handle extends from the upper stone. She pours grain into the opening. A few kernels bounce and fall to the floor. They make tiny taps on stone. She begins to turn the handle. The stone moves with resistance. At first it feels heavy, then it settles into a rhythm. The sound is low and rough, like stone rubbing stone. Grain cracks and breaks. A steady, quiet grinding fills the room. She turns the handle, then again. Her shoulders move slightly with each rotation. Her breath stays even. Her face remains calm. Heat from the oven begins to reach her back. It is faint at first, more a change in the air than a warmth on skin. The front of her body is still cold. She keeps turning. Flour begins to gather in a shallow dish beneath the stones. It is soft and pale, with a fresh smell that rises quickly when it is newly made. The smell is clean. It sits beneath the heavier smell of smoke. She stops after a time and brushes flour from the dish into a bowl. The flour clings to her fingers. It coats the lines of her palms. She turns the stone again, finishing the last of the grain. The sound remains the same. The rhythm remains the same. When she is done, she taps the mill lightly to loosen what remains. A small fall of flour drops into the dish. She gathers it and adds it to the bowl. She carries the bowl to the table. A jar of water stands nearby. She lifts it. The clay is cool and slightly damp. She pours a little water into a mixing trough. The water makes a soft splash. She adds flour. She does not throw it in quickly. She lets it fall in a slow stream from her fingers. A pale cloud lifts and settles. It lands on her wrist. It lands on the table. She mixes with her hand. Dry flour becomes damp. The texture changes under her fingers from powder to paste. It clings. She scrapes it from her fingers and folds it back. She adds more flour, then more water. The mixture thickens. It becomes dough. She kneads. She presses the heel of her hand into it. She folds it back over itself. She presses again. The dough resists. Then it yields. Her hands move steadily. Press, fold, turn, press again. The dough cools her palms at first, then it warms slightly from her touch. It becomes smoother with each repetition. She pauses to let it rest. Her hands remain on the table. She stands still and listens. The oven crackles softly. The sound is gentle and constant. Smoke continues to rise. The smell deepens into a warmer, fuller scent. Outside, the street is still mostly quiet. A far-off footstep, a brief murmur, then nothing. She kneads again. The rhythm returns. Press, fold, turn. She stops and covers the dough with a cloth. The cloth is dusted with flour. It settles over the dough and keeps it from drying. She moves back to the oven. She opens the oven mouth slightly. Heat breathes out. It touches her face and hands. Her skin feels the change at once. Inside, wood has become coals. They glow a dull red. She uses a long tool to spread them. The tool is worn smooth where fingers hold it. Ash shifts with a soft hiss. She closes the oven again. She stands quietly near the table. Her hands rest at her sides. Her breathing is slow. The room is still dark, but not as deep as before. A faint grey has begun to sit at the edges of the doorway. Not dawn yet, only the first thinning of night. She waits, letting the oven warm the stone, letting the dough rest under its cloth, letting the room fill slowly with the steady smell of smoke and flour. Her movements will continue in the same way, slow, exact, repetitive. The morning remains before dawn. She returns to the table. The cloth over the dough has settled into the shape beneath it. It rises slightly where the dough presses upward. She lifts the edge of the cloth and touches the surface with 2 fingers. The dough is cool and soft. It clings faintly to her skin. She presses once, lightly, then covers it again. She does not begin shaping yet. She allows more waiting. She moves to the water jar. The jar stands on the floor near the wall where the stone is darkest. Her hand rests on the rim. The clay is cold. Moisture has gathered on it. She pours a little water into a shallow bowl. The sound is brief and hollow. The water is so cold that it dulls her fingers at first touch. She rinses the cloth used for wiping the table. She rubs it between her hands. Dried flour loosens. It falls into the water in pale threads. The water turns cloudy. She wrings the cloth out slowly. Water runs between her fingers and drips to the floor. The floor darkens where it lands. She hangs the cloth on a peg. It drips quietly. She looks over the tools. A long wooden peel, a scraper, a small knife, a brush for ash, a basket for loaves. She picks up the scraper and runs her thumb along its edge. The wood is smooth, the edge is worn. It will still lift dough from the table. She sets it back down in the same place. The oven continues its slow work. Heat stays inside the stone. The fire is steady now, less flame, more coals. The sound is not sharp, only a soft shifting and occasional pop. She opens the oven mouth again. A deeper breath of heat comes out. It brings a smell of hot stone and wood smoke. The air near her face changes, her cheeks warm. She uses the long tool to move the coals. She spreads them farther, then draws them together. Ash lifts in a small cloud and settles. It lands on the stone lip of the oven mouth and on her hands. She wipes her fingers on her garment. She closes the oven. She waits near the table again. Her shoulders are relaxed. Her hands hang at her sides. Her breathing stays even. The room remains dim. The doorway holds a faint grey. It is still before dawn. A sound outside. A footstep. Then another, farther away. The city is beginning to shift in its sleep. She lifts the cloth from the dough. The dough holds its shape. It looks smoother than before. The surface is slightly taut. It yields slowly when she presses. She dusts the table with flour. She takes a handful and lets it fall in a thin stream. The flour drifts down and settles in a pale layer. It gathers in the dents of the wood. It softens the roughness. She lifts the dough and sets it onto the floured surface. It lands with a quiet, thick sound. She divides it. Her hands pinch and pull. She separates a portion, then another. The dough stretches and tears softly. The edges left behind are uneven and moist. She forms each piece into a rough shape, not perfect, only consistent enough. She presses the pieces lightly, then folds them. She turns them. She presses again. The motions repeat. The dough sticks less now because of the flour. Still it clings to her palms. She rubs her hands together to release it. Flour coats her skin. She sets the shaped pieces on a board. The board is dusted with flour. The dough rests there without movement. She covers the board with another cloth. She stands and returns to the oven. The stone inside is hotter now. The heat comes out in a strong, steady wave. It warms her forearms. She looks into the oven mouth. The coals are glowing more evenly. Ash lies in a thin layer like grey snow over red. She uses the tool to draw the coals toward the centre. Then she spreads them again. She is preparing the stone. She is making the heat even. She pauses and holds her hand near the oven mouth. She feels the heat on her palm and fingers. It is strong enough now. She closes the oven mouth and waits again. She walks to the sacks along the wall. She checks one tied cord. She tightens it. She checks another. She presses the side of a sack with her hand. Grain shifts inside with a soft, dry sound. She brushes stray kernels from the floor into a small pile and gathers them into her palm. She drops them into the sack. They rattle briefly, then settle. The floor remains cold beneath her feet. Even as the room warms, the stone keeps the winter. She feels it in her toes and ankles. She moves closer to the oven again. Here the air is warmer. The warmth rises. It sits around her knees and hips. Higher up, it is warmer still. She waits near that warmth. The cloth-covered dough rests on the board. It will soften further. It will become ready. She turns to the rack where yesterday's loaves have left their scent in the wood. The rack is empty now. It waits. She runs her hand along it. The wood is dry and slightly rough. It holds old flour in its corners. She wipes it lightly with the damp cloth that is drying on the peg. The cloth is cooler now and still wet. It leaves darker streaks on the wood that fade as they dry. She sets the cloth back. She listens again. Outside, a quiet voice, then silence. A distant scrape of something dragged across stone. Then nothing. Inside, only the oven and her movements. She returns to the dough. She lifts the cloth. The pieces have relaxed. Their surfaces are softer. They spread slightly where they rest. She dusts her hands with flour. She lifts one piece. She turns it in her hands. The dough feels elastic. It yields under pressure, then returns slowly. It is cool, but not as cold as before. She shapes it again. She tucks the edges under. She turns it. She presses lightly. She smooths the surface. She repeats with each piece. The motion stays the same. There is no variation. The repetition is steady and quiet. She sets each piece back down. She covers them again. She pauses. She stands near the oven. The heat warms her face and hands. It smells of smoke and hot stone. The air of the room now carries more warmth and more scent. Smoke has settled into everything. Flour dust remains suspended, then falls. She opens the oven mouth. Heat pours out. The coals are ready. She uses the long tool to pull the coals forward. She gathers them near the mouth of the oven for a moment, then pushes them to one side. The oven floor is cleared. The stone is exposed. Ash shifts and sighs as it moves. A soft sound, a pale cloud that drifts and then settles again. She takes the brush and sweeps the oven floor lightly. The brush makes a dry whispering sound. Ash gathers and moves. She sweeps it aside. She closes the oven mouth briefly, allowing the heat to steady. She returns to the board of dough. She uncovers the pieces. She lifts one and places it onto the peel. The peel is dusted with flour. The dough sits there, pale and still. She places another beside it, then another. She carries the peel to the oven. She opens the oven mouth. The heat meets her hands. She slides the first loaf onto the stone. It moves smoothly. It lands quietly. She slides the second, then the third. She withdraws the peel. She closes the oven mouth. She steps back. The baking begins without sound, only the continuing crackle of coals and the slow movement of heat through stone. She stands near the table. Her hands rest against her garment. Flour marks the fabric. Ash marks her fingertips. The doorway is lighter now. The grey is clearer, still muted, still early. She waits while the loaves begin to change inside the oven. She remains near the table. The oven mouth is closed. Heat stays inside the stone. The room holds a steady smell of smoke and warming dough. She does not watch the oven without pause. She lets time pass. She takes the damp cloth from the peg. It is cooler now. It is less stiff. She wipes the table again, not because it is dirty, but because flour always settles. A thin layer is always there. Her hand moves the cloth in long strokes. The wood becomes darker where the cloth touches it. Then the wetness fades. The table returns to its usual pale tone. She wipes the edges. She wipes the corners. She wipes the place where she set the bowl. The motion stays slow. She sets the cloth down. She rubs her fingers together. Flour and ash fall in a faint dust. She turns toward the oven. She opens the oven mouth slightly. Heat breathes out. It is strong but even. The smell changes. The smoke is there, but beneath it the smell of bread begins to appear. Not finished bread. A warm, swelling smell. She closes the oven mouth again. She steps back. She waits. The floor is still cold. Her feet feel it through the soles. The cold stays low and steady. She goes to the water jar. She lifts it and shifts it a short distance, nearer the table. Clay scrapes softly against stone. She pours water into the bowl again. The water makes a hollow sound as it lands. It is still cold. It makes her fingers feel numb when she dips them in. She rinses the scraper. She runs water over its edge. She rubs it clean with her thumb. She shakes it once. Drops fall to the floor and darken the stone. She sets the scraper back where it belongs. She goes to the millstone and brushes flour from the rim. Her fingers follow the groove. The flour is dry and fine. It clings to her skin. She gathers it into her palm and carries it to the table. She drops it into the bowl of flour. It falls without sound. She stands still again. The oven makes a small crackle. A coal shifts. A faint pop, then quiet. Outside, the street holds more sound than before. Not busy sound, only the beginning of movement. A footstep, a brief voice. A door opening and closing somewhere in the distance. The doorway of the bakery is still dim. The grey outside is clearer but not bright. No sun, only morning coming. She lifts the cloth covering the remaining dough. It has relaxed further. It spreads slightly on the board. She dusts the board with flour again. She does it in a thin layer. The flour settles, pale and soft. She divides the remaining dough into smaller pieces. Her hands pinch and pull. The dough stretches, then yields. The tear is quiet. She rounds each piece. She tucks the edge under with her fingers. She turns it. She smooths it. She repeats. The dough is cool and elastic. It resists briefly, then gives. It leaves a faint stickiness on her fingertips. She rubs flour over her hands and continues. She places the pieces in a basket lined with cloth. The cloth is worn. It holds old flour in its folds. She covers the basket. The dough rests again. She goes to the oven. She opens it wider this time. Heat rolls out. It warms her forearms and face. Inside, the loaves have risen. Their surfaces have tightened. The pale colour has begun to deepen. She slides the peel in carefully. She turns each loaf. The bottom resists slightly against the stone, then releases. The movement is steady. No quick motions, no sudden gestures. She withdraws the peel. She closes the oven mouth. She stands near the oven for a moment. The warmth is strongest here. It steadies the room. Her garment holds the smell of smoke now more strongly. The wool has taken it in. It will not leave quickly. She goes to the rack and checks the boards with her hand. They are dry. They are clean enough. She wipes one board with her palm. A faint dust lifts and settles. She sweeps the floor lightly again. The broom makes a dry, brushing sound. Flour gathers into a thin line near the wall. Ash gathers near the oven. She does not chase every speck. She gathers what she can easily reach. She lifts it into a small pan. The pan makes a dull sound when it touches the stone. She sets the pan aside. She pauses again. The oven continues its work. The smell continues to change. It becomes more like finished bread. It becomes deeper, heavier, steady. She opens the oven. A stronger wave of heat comes out. It carries a fuller scent. She draws the first loaf out. She places it on the rack. Steam rises briefly and disappears. She draws the second loaf out, then the third. She sets them with a small space between each one. She does not stack them. They cool best with air around them. She touches the crust of one loaf lightly with a fingertip. It is firm. It gives a faint sound under the touch. She pulls her hand away. She closes the oven mouth part way. Heat remains inside. She stands at the table and watches the loaves cool, not with attention, only with presence. Outside, more footsteps pass. A cartwheel turns somewhere. The sound is slow and heavy. It fades. The doorway is brighter now. It is still soft light, filtered by buildings. She arranges the loaves on the rack again. She turns one so the best side faces forward. She turns another. She takes a clean cloth and brushes a little ash from the oven lip. The ash comes away easily. It leaves a darker streak where the stone is slightly damp from the air. She folds the cloth and sets it aside. She checks the coals. She opens the oven mouth and looks in. The coals have settled. They glow less brightly, but they remain hot. She adds a small piece of wood, not thick, just enough to keep the heat steady. The wood catches slowly. A small flame appears, then fades into glowing ember. The smell of fresh smoke rises again, thin and brief. Then it settles into the larger smell of the room. She closes the oven mouth again. She returns to the basket of dough. She lifts the cloth. She touches the surface of one piece. It is softer now. It yields easily. She dusts the peel with flour. She taps it lightly. Flour spreads in a thin layer. She lifts a piece of dough and sets it on the peel. Then another, then another. She carries the peel to the oven. She opens the oven mouth. Heat breathes out again. Her face warms. She slides the next loaves onto the stone, one at a time. Each lands quietly. She withdraws the peel. She closes the oven mouth. She steps back. The rack now holds cooling loaves. The oven holds baking loaves. The basket holds resting dough. The routine stays even. She wipes the counter space again slowly with the damp cloth. She wipes where hands will touch. She wipes where bread will be placed. She sets the cloth down. She stands near the doorway for a moment. She does not open it yet. The bakery is not open. She listens to the street and to the oven. Footsteps outside. Breathing inside, a faint crackle of heat. She returns to the table. She waits while the second batch bakes, letting the room hold its warmth, letting the smell of bread become steady and familiar, letting the morning continue without any change in pace. The bakery settles into a steady openness as the morning advances without any clear moment of arrival, the door remaining open long enough that the street is always present without ever fully entering, cold air moving in low along the stone floor and staying there while warmth gathers higher in the room, held by the oven, the walls, and the slow accumulation of heat that does not announce itself. The woman moves within the same narrow path again and again, from oven to rack, from rack from counter back to the table, her steps quiet and measured, softened by stone that has been warmed and cooled many times before, and the sound of her sandals no longer echoing because the space is filled with cloth, wood, and heat. Customers begin to arrive at irregular but gentle intervals, stepping just inside the doorway and waiting without speaking, their presence marked only by the shift of air and the soft sound of movement on stone. And each exchange follows the same simple order without variation or attention. She turns toward the rack and takes bread from the front where the loaves have cooled the longest, lifts it with steady hands, wraps it in cloth, with motions, learned through repetition, gathers the coins that are placed down, and passes the bread across, hands meeting only through fabric before the customer leaves and the door shifts, letting in another thin ribbon of cold air before settling again. Between arrivals, she keeps the space ready, wiping the counter with a damp cloth, gathering crumbs without chasing every trace, brushing flour dust back into the wood, and rinsing the cloth when it stiffens. Cold water running between her fingers before she wrings it slowly and hangs it back on its peg to drip in a steady, quiet way. She checks the oven often, opening it just enough that heat breathes out and the smell of crust deepens briefly before steadying again, sliding the peel in to turn loaves with careful pressure and withdrawing it without haste before closing the stone mouth and stepping back to let the heat settle again into the walls. At the table, dough rests under cloth, and when there is a lull, she lifts the fabric and presses once with 2 fingers, feeling the surface yield easily before covering it again and allowing more time or kneading in slow repetitions, pressing and folding and turning until the dough softens under her hands, then pausing and letting it rest again without impatience. More customers come, sometimes close together and sometimes spaced apart, none lingering, each exchange quiet and unchanged, and the dish of coins grows heavier until she moves it farther from the edge without counting, listening to the small sound they make as they slide and settle. She sweeps lightly when flour and ash gather, collecting what is easy to reach into a pan and leaving the rest where it lies, setting the pan aside near the wall where it will wait, while the oven continues its steady work and finished loaves are drawn out and placed on the rack with space between each crust, steam rising briefly and disappearing into the cooler air near the doorway. She rearranges the rack as needed, older loaves forward and newer loaves behind, keeping the order clear without thinking about it, her hands knowing where each loaf belongs without pause or adjustment. The room holds all its stages at once, cooling bread, baking bread, resting dough, waiting customers, moving air, while time passes without being marked, the routine unchanged except for its weight, which increases quietly as the morning continues and the street beyond the doorway grows more present without becoming loud. Footsteps pass more often now. A cartwheel rolls somewhere beyond the threshold. Voices drift by and fade, but inside the bakery, the sound remains restrained. The low crackle of heat in the oven, the brush of cloth over wood, the soft scrape of peel on stone. The smell remains steady, smoke settled into stone, flour dust resting on every surface, the scent of bread constant and familiar, no longer sharp or new, simply part of the air. She continues moving between the same points, wiping and sweeping between exchanges, checking the oven, turning loaves, arranging the rack, her breathing even and unremarked, her posture unchanged as the warmth settles into her shoulders and hands. When another lull comes, she prepares more dough, measuring flour by hand, letting it fall into the trough, pouring water in a slow stream, mixing with her fingers until dry becomes damp, and damp becomes paste, and paste becomes dough, kneading in the same calm rhythm until the surface smooths, then covering it again and returning her attention to the oven. Customers continue to arrive and leave, one at a time, or sometimes two close together, each staying only long enough to take bread, the exchange remaining quiet and practical, without words or attention, bread moving across the counter, coins moving into the dish, hands separating again as the door shifts and the air settles. The door stays open, cold air skimming along the floor and gathering near the threshold, warmth staying above it and lingering around the oven and table. And the woman keeps working in the same narrow space, her movements slow and exact, repeating without variation as the morning settles more fully into its ordinary pace. She wipes the counter again, slow passes of the cloth pressing crumbs into the fabric, rinses it when it stiffens, wrings it out carefully, hangs it back to drip, and returns to her path without interruption. She checks the oven, opens it slightly, turns the loaves, closes it again, steps back, waits, and listens, allowing the heat to do its work. She lifts loaves from the oven when they are ready and sets them on the rack, spacing them carefully so the crusts remain firm, then adjusts the order again so the older loaves stay forward. She sweeps lightly when dust gathers, collects what is easy, and leaves the rest, knowing it will return no matter how often it is removed. The routine remains unchanged, the pattern steady and unremarkable, the bakery holding its warmth, its smells, and its small, consistent sounds, while the morning continues without announcement, without urgency, and without any need for change. The bakery stays in its settled rhythm, the door remains open, it moves slightly with the air, it creaks once when it shifts, then becomes still again. Cold air continues to enter at floor level. It rests around the threshold and along the stone nearest the street. Warm air gathers above it, held by the oven, held by the stone walls, held by the bodies moving through the doorway. The woman keeps to her places. She works within the same narrow path, from the oven to the rack, from the rack to the counter, from the counter to the table, then back again. A customer steps in. The sound of sandals is soft on stone. The person does not pause long. The woman turns toward the rack. She reaches to the front where the older loaves are easiest to take. She lifts one loaf. The crust is dry now. It no longer gives off visible steam. It holds only a faint warmth. She sets it on the counter. The counter is stone and worn smooth in places. It is cool to the touch despite the warm air. She draws a cloth around the loaf. The cloth folds over the crust. It holds the crumbs in. Coins are placed down. Metal taps stone. She gathers the coins into her palm and drops them into the dish. The dish answers with a small clink. She passes the wrapped loaf across. The customer takes it and leaves. The door shifts. The air changes. Then it steadies. She wipes the counter. One slow pass, then another, catching crumbs. She brushes crumbs into her palm and drops them into the pan by the wall. She returns to the oven. She opens the oven mouth slightly. Heat breathes out, even and steady. The smell of baking crust rises again, fuller for a moment. Inside, the loaves placed earlier have risen. Their surfaces have tightened. Fine cracks begin to open. She slides the peel in. The edge scrapes faintly. She turns the loaves one by one. The motion is slow. The loaves resist, then release. She withdraws the peel. She closes the oven mouth. She stands near the oven for a short moment. The warmth is strongest here. It warms her hands and wrists. She steps back to the table. The table holds a board with resting dough pieces under cloth. She touches the cloth. It is warm and slightly damp from the air. She lifts it and checks the dough. The pieces have relaxed. They spread slightly where they sit. Their surfaces look smooth and pale. She dusts her hands with flour. The flour clings to her fingertips and the lines of her palms. She reshapes the pieces with small motions. Tuck the edges under. Turn. Smooth the top. She repeats the same motion for each piece. She does not vary it. The movements are even. She covers the dough again. A customer enters. She turns away from the table. She goes to the rack. She repeats the exchange. Bread, cloth, coins, hands. The customer leaves. She wipes the counter again. The cloth is damp and cool, but it warms slightly in her hands. It leaves a thin wet mark that dries quickly. She returns to the table. She takes the water bowl and pours the cloudy water into a small drain area. The water runs away slowly. It leaves pale streaks. She pours fresh water from the jar into the bowl. The water is cold. It has the faint taste of clay in the air. She dips the cloth in the fresh water. She rubs it between her hands. She wrings it out slowly. Water drips to the floor. She hangs the cloth on its peg again. She sweeps lightly again. The broom moves flour dust into thin lines. It moves crumbs into a small pile. It moves ash away from the oven mouth. The sound of the broom is dry and regular. Brush, brush, brush. She collects the small pile into the pan. She sets the pan aside. She returns to the oven. She opens the oven mouth wider. Heat comes out strongly. It warms her face and brow. The air near her eyes feels dry. The loaves inside are close to finished. Their crusts have darkened. The cracks are wider. She slides the peel in and draws the first loaf out. She sets it on the rack. Steam rises briefly and disappears. She draws the next loaf out, then the next. She sets them with space between. She does not stack them. She lets air move around each crust. She closes the oven mouth part way. The smell of fresh crust thickens. It settles into the room. She adjusts the rack. She moves older loaves forward again. She places newer loaves behind. She keeps the order clear. She touches one loaf. The crust is firm and dry. It gives a faint sound under her finger. She steps back. Outside, more footsteps pass. A cartwheel is closer now, rolling slowly. The street is more active, but still quiet. Inside, the bakery remains calm. A customer enters. She repeats the exchange. The customer leaves. She wipes the counter. The dish of coins is heavier now. She lifts it briefly and shifts it farther from the edge. Coins slide and settle with a soft clink. She returns to the table. She prepares another small mix of dough. Flour falls into the trough. A pale cloud lifts and settles. She pours a little water. It splashes softly. Cold water meets dry flour. She mixes with her fingers. The texture changes under her hand. Dry becomes damp. Damp becomes paste. Paste becomes dough. She kneads. Press. Fold. Turn. Press. The dough resists at first, then yields. Her hands continue. She pauses and covers the new dough with cloth. It will rest. It will soften. She checks the basket of shaped pieces again. She lifts the cloth. She touches the surface of one piece. It is ready for the oven soon. She dusts the peel with flour. She places several pieces on it, leaving space between. She does not crowd them. She carries the peel to the oven. She opens the oven mouth. Heat meets her hands. The smell of hot stone rises. She slides the dough onto the oven floor. One by one, each lands quietly. She withdraws the peel. She closes the oven mouth. She steps back again. The routine holds. The rack holds cooling loaves. The oven holds baking loaves. The table holds resting dough. The counter holds brief exchanges. The door holds a steady movement of air. Customers enter at intervals. Each one stays only a short time. The woman's movements remain the same. Slow, exact, repetitive. She wipes, she sweeps, she checks the oven, she turns loaves, she arranges the rack. The smell remains steady. Smoke, hot stone, crust. The sound remains steady. Footsteps, wood against stone, a quiet crackle, a cloth dragged over a surface. The temperature remains steady. Cold low on the floor, warmth near the oven and higher in the room. Morning continues in the same calm way, with no change in pace, with no need for words, with only the repeated ordinary work of bread and heat and stone. The bakery remains open. The door stays wide enough that the street is always present. Air moves in and out. The cold stays low along the stone floor. The warmth stays above it, held in the room. Light outside is stronger now, though still winter pale. It does not shine into the bakery very far. It rests at the threshold. Inside, the oven and the heat in the stone keep the space steady. The woman continues without change. She stands near the counter when she needs to. She returns to the table when there is a pause. She goes to the oven often, not quickly, but regularly. A customer enters. The sound of sandals is soft. The person steps just inside and waits. The woman turns to the rack. The rack holds loaves at different stages of cooling. The older ones are in front, the newer ones are behind. She lifts one loaf from the front. It is fully cool now. It feels firm and dry. She sets it on the counter. A few crumbs break loose and scatter. She wraps it with cloth. The cloth is folded around the loaf. It holds the shape. Coins are placed down, metal on stone, brief and dull. She gathers the coins into her palm and drops them into the dish. Coins shift against each other with a soft clink. She passes the bread across. Hands take it. The customer leaves. The door shifts again. Air moves, then it steadies. She wipes the counter where the loaf rested. One slow pass, then another. She gathers crumbs into her palm and drops them into the pan. She returns to the oven. She opens the oven mouth slightly. Heat breathes out. It is steady and even. Inside, loaves bake. Their surfaces tighten. Their colour deepens. She slides the peel in. The edge scrapes faintly on stone. She turns the loaves one by one. Each loaf resists slightly, then releases. She turns them so the heat stays even. She withdraws the peel. She closes the oven mouth. She steps back. For a short time no one enters. She uses the pause. She rinses her hands in the bowl of water. The water is cold and clean now. It makes her fingers feel numb for a moment. She rubs her palms together under the water. Flour loosens and falls away. The water turns slightly cloudy again. She shakes her hands once. Drops scatter on the stone. She dries her hands on her garment. She checks the cloth-covered dough resting on the table. She touches the cloth. It is warm. The dough beneath has softened. She lifts the cloth and presses the dough once with 2 fingers. It yields easily. She covers it again. She goes to the rack. She adjusts the loaves again. She moves 2 older loaves forward. She shifts 2 newer loaves behind them. The arrangement stays practical and simple. The smell in the room is stable now. It is not growing. It is not fading. Smoke has settled into the walls. Flour dust sits on every surface. Bread crust scent is constant. Outside footsteps are more frequent. A cart passes closer now. The wheel sound is slow and heavy. It fades and is replaced by other sounds. Inside, voices remain low. Customers come in 1 at a time, or 2 at most. They stay only long enough to take bread. Another customer enters. The woman repeats the exchange. Loaf, cloth, coins, hands. The customer leaves. She wipes the counter again. She keeps the cloth damp enough to gather crumbs. She does not soak it. She rinses it when it becomes too dusty. She lifts the cloth, dips it into the bowl, wrings it out slowly. Water runs between her fingers. It drips to the floor. She hangs the cloth on its peg again. She sweeps lightly again. The broom moves flour into thin lines. It moves crumbs into a small pile. It moves ash away from the oven mouth. Brush, brush, brush. She gathers the small pile into the pan. She sets the pan aside. She returns to the oven. She opens the oven mouth wider. Heat comes out strongly. It warms her face and brow. It warms her hands. The loaves inside are ready. She draws the first loaf out and places it on the rack. Steam rises briefly, then disappears. She draws the next loaf out, then the next. She sets each loaf with space between. Air moves around them. The crust stays firm. She closes the oven mouth part way. The smell of fresh crust thickens briefly. Then it settles back into the room's constant smell. She adjusts the rack again. Older loaves forward, newer loaves behind. She touches the crust of one loaf with a fingertip. Firm, dry, a faint sound. She steps back and waits. A customer enters. Again the exchange is the same. She wraps a loaf. Coins are placed. Coins are gathered. Bread is passed across. The customer leaves. She wipes the counter. She checks the dish of coins again and moves it slightly farther from the edge. Coins slide and settle. She returns to the table. She begins to knead the resting dough again. Press, fold, turn, press. Her hands move in the same calm rhythm. The dough yields and smooths. She pauses and covers it again. She looks toward the oven. She does not need to check it yet. She stands still for a short moment. She listens to the sounds. Footsteps outside, a voice passing, the low crackle of heat inside the oven, her own breathing. The routine is stable now. The bakery remains warm near the oven and cold near the door. The smell remains steady. The sound remains quiet. Customers continue to come in at intervals. Bread continues to move from the rack to the counter to the street. Coins continue to gather in the dish. She continues wiping and sweeping between exchanges. She continues checking the oven. She continues turning loaves. She continues arranging the rack. The morning continues with no shift in tone, no change in pace, only the ordinary repetition of work in winter air, in a room of stone and wood, warmed by the oven and filled with the steady smell of bread.